Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our second talk in the DEFCon speaker series. I am Rupika Rizam at Salem State University. I am the PI on the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium, or DEFCon, with my wonderful co-PIs, Kasia Valens at Salem, Sonia Donaldson at New Jersey City University, Tanisha Taylor at Texas Southern University, and Jamila Moore-Pugh, who at Cal State Fullerton, who will be actually moderating and hosting our event today. I just wanted to welcome you all. We are thrilled you're here. Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium is an effort to bring together faculty, particularly at resourced universities, who are working at the intersections of ethnic studies and digital humanities. And we have our wonderful speaker series. We have our virtual annual meeting, which will be taking place on May 13th. And will feature Joanne Gavin of the Furious Flower Poetry Project at James Madison University, and as well as presentations from participants in our grant programs. We will also have another speaker on April 25th, Jim McGrath, who's an instructional designer at Salem State University. So I will make sure to put that information in the chat so you know how to access all of our events. And we are very delighted that you're here. So I'd like to now turn this over to Dr. Moore-Pugh to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupsi. And I have the pleasure of welcoming our speakers for today, Dr. Elisa Beshero-Bondar and Dr. Shirley Moody-Turner. I'll start with Dr. Beshero-Bondar. Dr. Elisa Beshero-Bondar is a professor of digital humanities and program chair of digital media arts and technology at Penn State Erie, the Behrend College. She has been involved in digital scholarly editing for the past decade and has served as the TEI Technical Counsel since 2016. Back in 2011, she published a book, Women, Epic, and Transition in British Romanticism with University of Delaware Press, that paved the way for her digital work in the next decade, including her launch of the Digital Mitford Project to produce a TEI-based digital scholarly edition of the works and letters of 19th century author Mary Russell Mitford. Lately, she coordinates remediation, automated collation, and the TEI conversion pipeline for the Frankenstein Vorium Project, comparing 5 versions of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Her recent publications address work in progress on these projects, as well as theory and practice with markup technologies in digital scholarly editing and pedagogy. Her development site at newtfire.org, and we'll go ahead and put that in the chat, hosts a wide range of digital projects for research and teaching in collaboration with colleagues and led by her students. Welcome, Dr. Beshero-Bondar. Dr. Shirley Moody-Turner is Associate Professor and Award-winning teacher of English and African American Studies at Penn State University. She is founding co-director with P. Gabriel Foreman of the Center for Black Digital Research, #DIG Black, where she works with teams of faculty, staff, librarians, postdoctoral fellows, student leaders, and community members to bring to digital life the lost, overlooked, and often buried histories of 19th and early 20th century Black organizing. She is the founding director of the Anna Julia Cooper Digital Project, a cross-institutional partnership that worked with the Moreland Springer Research Center to digitize the Anna Julia Cooper papers, and with Douglas Day 2020 to produce a community-based crowdsourced transcription of the collection. She is author and editor of several published and forthcoming books, including Black Folklore and the Politics of Racial Representation, the co-edited collection, Contemporary African American Literature, The Living Canon, African American Literature in Transition, 1900 to 1910, and the forthcoming Penguin Portable Anna Julia Cooper, published by Penguin Classics. She is currently at work on an interpretive biography reframing Cooper's courageous revolt as part of the long history of Black women's organizing. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Shirley Moody-Turner. And now I'm going to turn it over to our speakers.
All right. Shirley, do you want to start with the screen share? And when she does that, you'll see on the first slide that there are some ways you can contact us very quickly featured on it. There, you shall see our Twitter handles are on. Mine is at Apilia, which is short for short epic. And there's at Doc Moody-Turner. And if you find us, you'll find your way to a lot of our digital projects. I wanted to thank Shirley for agreeing to work with me for the past couple of years and for helping me to introduce me to Anna Julia Cooper. And I want to thank Jen Asazi and Heather Froelich for letting me know about this project and helping me find my way to Shirley. It's been a real pleasure. This has been a scholarly friendship initiated virtually during a pandemic, and I have been learning so much, and my students are privileged to be in company with Shirley's wonderful research. So I'm going to hand it over to you after thanking you one more time for doing this with me. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ribsy, for organizing this event. Thank you to the co-PIs. I know that any of these events take a team, and thank you to the team for organizing it. And Jamalia, thank you for the walkout music. Like how, just summoning Mary J. Blige is always a good way to start. So thank you for that. So wanted to start today, and I will ask your indulgence as we kind of make our way. We have lots of screens and lots of sharing going on, so we'll try to make it as smooth as possible, but if you can indulge us, we appreciate that. But thank you all for coming, and thank you for giving us a chance to talk about work that is, I think, so interesting and compelling for us, and hopefully just getting a chance to share and get new perspectives and be in conversation with a larger group of people is always exciting. And I also do want to just shout out and second Elisa's recognition of Heather and Jen for introducing us, and to Elisa for being such a great collaborator and really, introducing me to new aspects of Cooper's work. So it's been wonderful. So I wanted to, I guess, start out by also acknowledging that I'm one person sitting here, and hopefully as I'm sharing today, it will become clear that I'm really representing a lot of people and a big team and a long history. So I'm one person sitting here, but there's a long team at every step of this work that's been really integral. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about I guess starting at the end. So I am currently in the process of finishing up editing the Anna Julia Cooper Portable Penguin edition. And it's beautiful, beautiful cover. And, just Keebs Laurent designed the cover. And I think it really speaks to Anna Julia Cooper and the modern, vibrant, engaging, forthright visionary that we are working with and whose materials that we're working with. And we wanted to, I guess the whole project has really been about looking at the ways in which Cooper has always been very conscious and intentional about engaging the structures and the forms that shape and structure knowledge, and always wanting to make clear that those are never neutral. So I wanted to, I guess, say a little bit about the edition and kind of what it afforded us, and then what we've kind of learned from that. So in editing Anna Julia Cooper's papers, it was a wonderful opportunity to, one, provide an accessible, affordable edition of Cooper's materials, and to be able to present those for a large selection of materials for a broad audience. And one of the things that happened in editing Cooper's, in editing the Penguin, was that I was allowed to kind of introduce 2 new books into Cooper's kind of oeuvre. And one is her scrapbook. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but it hadn't kind of historically been thought of as a scrapbook. I'm sorry, as a book, as a standalone book. It had been thought of more as a collection of articles, right? And then the other was to introduce a book called On Education, which Cooper had wanted to publish, had an outline for in her papers, but had never been able to publish. So in doing the print edition, we were able to bring these materials together, right, from her archive, and to bring them out in a very accessible edition. And what it also showed us was, I keep pressing the space bar and it's spacing in my document, I'm sorry. And it also showed us what we're kind of calling a Cooperian pedagogy. And when you get a chance to kind of read Cooper and really spend time and like luxuriate in her writing, you can see there are a lot of overarching and undergirding themes that emerge again and again. And so one of the things that came through is that, there is this kind of Cooperian pedagogy in which Cooper is very critical about what she calls teaching in this machine age. And she wants to think about, what would it mean? And she's talking, to students and teachers, what would it mean for us to really think about how we can draw on our own perspectives, experiences of teachers and of students to really inform how education takes place and takes shape. And so she's pushing back against this rote memorization, this kind of abstraction of knowledge. She also wants to think about students as collaborators. How can students be co-collaborators in this process of creating knowledge? And there's a wonderful, very heated exchange that takes place between Anna Julie Cooper and W.E.B. Du Bois about production that her students do of the Aeneid. So they put on this very elaborate production of the Aeneid at Dunbar High School, and she wants W.E.B. Du Bois to cover that production in the Crisis magazine. And he resists for various reasons. And they have this exchange back and forth. And finally, she says, like, you don't understand what this production has meant for these students and what it's meant for these students to undertake this in terms of the cost, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of their engagement and rewriting of this classic. And so she's really seeing her students as collaborators, and she's wanting them to be acknowledged as such in the kind of larger discourse. So I think, looking at students as collaborators, and then really thinking about how student-led education can be transformative. So how can working with students really transform the ways in which they're thinking about knowledge? How can they become knowledge producers? And finally, really important is that she also talks about wanting to be intentional, not just about the ideas of a Cooperian pedagogy or transformative pedagogy, but what does this mean in terms of material and structural support? So she says in one address to the Protestant Episcopal Church in 1886, let me be clear, I mean, let scholarships be raised, let funding flow to support this kind of work. So she's never doing a kind of disembodied, like, yes, we should do this in theory, but no, she's like, what are the actual structural challenges? So in editing the Anna Julie Cooper, the portable Anna Julie Cooper, really some of these things that we have known all along and that we've been grappling with, but really came to the forefront. And one of those things was also about the actual challenges and limits of print. So as we were editing, we started to see, there were things in the print edition, or there were things in the archive that there's things that the print edition could do really, really well. And it's really important. But there were challenges in representing those spaces where her writing and her work exceeded conventional publishing protocols. And so that was one of the things that we really, and I guess I give that whole background to say, you know, that kind of led us to this point of thinking about what does print enable us to do? What are the opportunities? What are the constraints? And what does the digital allow us to do? What are the opportunities? What are the constraints? And so that kind of brought us to a point where we were really thinking, thinking in lots of ways about, the many, many ways of engaging with her archive. So I guess the one other thing I will mention too is also thinking, and the reason I kind of backed up and started with the Cooperian pedagogy is to think, what does it mean to take seriously a Black woman's vision, pedagogy, and practice, or the person that we're studying? What does it mean to take seriously the ways in which they have articulated? How can that help guide the ways in which we carry out the work? And so those kinds of questions and considerations were really, guiding some of the decisions and choices that we made. So all of this is to say these insights led to several different collaborations over the years. In 2017, wrong way. In 2017, we actually, the Anna Julia Cooper Society partnered with Lopez Matthews and Joellen Albashir at Howard University to digitize the Anna Julia Cooper papers held there. Our team, you can see here, our team included McKinney Johnson, Dr. Lopez Matthews, myself, Adrina Eifel, and we digitized the collection, and it's now available at the Digital Howard website. And then we also worked with Dr. Lopez Matthews, who organized a symposium so that we could share the collection and engage larger audiences and scholars in both thinking about the work of Anna Julia Cooper, but also placing it into the larger context of Black women's material culture. So we digitized the collection in 2017. And I guess I should back up and say too that one of my roles here today is to provide some kind of background and history and context for how we arrived at the collaboration with Elisa in fall 2020. So this is really wanting to frame out, both what the collaboration itself looked like, but then also this kind of long journey that we took to get there, and a lot of things that were happening over the course of 3 years before the edition. So after the collection, after we worked with Moreland to digitize the collection, we really wanted to be able to see how would we engage students in working with the collection. And we wanted for me, I took a very kind of simple, straightforward approach to this. We had students look at the digital collection and to see, what do you see? What do you see when you're looking at the collection? And one of the assignments that we did I think in 2018 was to have the students look at the digital collection and to select 3 to 5 items from the collection and to provide commentary, to provide a commentary that speaks to some aspect of the collection in relation to Black women's intellectual history and print culture. And so you can see one of the examples here. The student chose 2 items that were biographies of Cooper, and all of this text around the printed material, all of the handwriting is Cooper correcting the biography. So, and this is so indicative of how she interacts with and engages with printed work. So it really provided a wonderful example of how the printed text was not closed at all, right? And that this was a space where Cooper felt the need to constantly interact and engage. And one of the, I guess, how many of you know Anna Julie Cooper? Yeah, okay. For those of you who don't, I like the hands going up. For those of you who don't, Cooper was really a renowned 19th and 20th century activist, educator, intellectual. She penned one of the most important foundational texts of Black feminist thought, A Voice Beyond the South. And she was the fourth Black woman to get a PhD when she defended her dissertation at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. She fought against Jim Crow education in the nation's capital, what she called her courageous revolt, and she lost her job for that fight, which she says, she writes that she lost her head in the fray of that revolt. So she was really this seminal figure who was working with and alongside lots, other Black women and other members of the Black community. And I just want, I guess, to share that so make sure everyone knows who Cooper is. So after the students, they had a chance to work with the digital collection to look at different items. One of the students in these second two examples on the slide, one of the students looked at materials that were not part of the digital collection. So collected reviews of A Voice from the South. And that was really significant because for a lot of Black women writers, some of that foundational infrastructure work of recovery has not even been done yet. And so bringing those reviews together also allowed us to look at how Cooper's work was being received, what those reviews say about that period in that moment. And so, we were already starting to think about what do we see in this digital collection? What ways of reading do we need to utilize in order to kind of see Cooper's interventions and to read them differently, and then also to see what was there and what was not there. One of the very interesting pieces that we also worked with was the Cooper scrapbook. So this is a scrapbook Cooper kept from 1931 to 1940. And in it, she pasted articles that she had written for the local press about issues in Washington, D.C. related to labor issues, educational issues, book reviews, her commentary on what was happening both locally in Washington, D.C. and then nationally as well. And so again, we were thinking in conventional ways of addressing the articles in the scrapbook. They've been excerpted from the scrapbook. So you get the actual transcription of the text, but not a sense of how they actually appeared in the scrapbook. And so one of the students, Jonathan Kasaji, who was actually a computer science student at Harvard, made a scrapbook reader so that we could look at these texts and see what the conversation might have been between Cooper's pasted articles and then the base text in which they were interacting. So this is one of the articles, and you can see Cooper chose a book called The First 50, and it's a history of Standard Oil and their rise to power and dominance. And she chooses that book to paste these articles, which in many of them call into question that the machine age, call into question labor practices, call into question how this is impacting our ideas and practices of education. And so we wanted to be able to see that these weren't just articles, but perhaps this was actually another book in Cooper's oeuvre. So if you look, you can see there's actually a dialogue going on between the the base text and what Cooper chooses to kind of write over it. And so here, you know, she's talking, I just excerpted a few parts, but she's talking about this machine age with its, you know, goal of mass production and speeding everything up and the impacts that this is having on higher education. And then elsewhere in the book, you can see there's all of these images of these machines and, you know, this kind of homage to speed and mass production. So there's a real kind of back and forth between the article and the text. So again, this was all giving students an opportunity to work with the materials and see what do you see, you know, if you were to work with this digital collection, what do you see in terms of how she's engaging with the text? What's missing? What do we need to be able to read in and through the archive differently? And so then in 2019, we participated, collaborated with the Douglas Day team to transcribe Anna Julia Cooper's digital collection. We had a team that went to a workshop to learn how to build a transcription project. And Heather was there. Hi, Heather. And so we participated in the Zooniverse workshop. The students learned how to create a transcription project, and then they created the manifest. They really, with a lot of work and support from people like Heather and Jim Casey, but they used this, it was really student driven, and it was an opportunity for them to see what kinds of questions emerge as they start kind of processing the materials at a different level, and how creating the manifest is part of the intellectual project. So making decisions about how to name things, making decisions about what kinds of categories they were going to include, that these were all intellectual questions as much as, you know, kind of logistical or technical questions. So then they created this beautiful Transcribe Cooper project, made all kinds of decisions about how they would organize the workflows, so that they had to decide if they wanted to have people accessing the materials by type, you know, as poetry, as correspondences, what have you, by region, you know, would it be more helpful for people to do the North Carolina or the Oberlin, or would it be more helpful for them to go by date and set this up at different periods in her life? And they had to connect that to thinking about, well, who's my audience for this, you know, and if my audience is going to be really interested in the materiality and certain sets of materials, poetry versus the essays versus the letters, you know, then maybe it's by type. And so they had to grapple with all of those kinds of questions as they designed the transcription project. So from there, you can see we with the incredible leadership of the Douglas Day team and Jim Casey and Denise Berger and all of the people on the Douglas Day team, had a wonderful, successful Douglas Day 2020 event in which we did transcribe 100% of the materials in the project, and ended up, you know, here you can see how we went from digital image, so the digital image of a letter from the archive, to the crowdsourced transcription in the second image, which is, we did 3 times of 3 sets of transcriptions and then had to reconcile them. And then the reconciled text, and then deciding how we were actually going to format the reconciled text. So we moved through this process, arrived at transcriptions and reconciled texts of the items in the digital collection. And what also became apparent was that we were going to have to contend with how we deal with documents and items that didn't adhere to conventional features. And so with the scrapbooks, with things like the survey that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, we realize that the straight transcription is important, and it does a really important set of work. But we also, when Elisa approached in fall 2020, it gave us an opportunity to think about how does this present a challenge and a problem and an opportunity that we can bring another set of eyes, another set of students, another set of tools to grapple with. And so the survey is called the Negro College Graduate Survey. And in it, Elisa's going to talk about this in a minute, but it's always been one of my favorite items. So when Elisa came to me and said, what do you think about us, what we might work with that would be great for my students to kind of grapple with, and from Cooper's archive. And I immediately thought of this survey because it's so important. It communicates so many aspects of how Cooper kind of represented her life, how she grappled with these structures and forms and mechanisms that were gendered and racialized in all of these ways, how she was intent on showing that knowledge was not, that these forms of knowledge were not neutral. And so that immediately came to mind. And we'll talk probably about one example, a few different examples, but one of our favorites is a question number 65. I feel like that's going to be this famous tag, like question 65. Asks if Cooper can share her racial philosophy, and briefly, and it takes up all of the lines on the front page. It circles around the back. It runs down the back side of the page. So it's this wonderful example of her refusing to be bound by the structures of the form. It's also a place, importantly, where she identifies herself, self-identifies as her most important roles of how she wants to be recognized as a trained thinker and teacher. So thinking of her as both Black intellectual and educator, and that's how she identified, and that's where she names it, is in that survey. And so, yeah, so with that, I guess the last thing I'll say is that excerpt from question 65 has been published. And I was critical, of how it came out in one of the earlier editions. But then when I was editing the Penguin and dealing with the constraints of print, I was definitely more sympathetic. And, I think one of the real advantages and benefits of working across print and digital and seeing this as iterative and not final and closed is that it can come out as a transcribed text in a print edition. And for us, when we did it in the Penguin, we knew we could point to the digital edition, and we knew we could point to the digital collection. And that was hugely important because it allowed us to know that we could share this without it feeling like this was closed, but that this was open and that people could see the different ways in which it's been represented. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Elisa to talk about the amazing work that her and her students have done.
Hi, so here's that moment where we do the awkward transition, but I'm going to steal the screen share, and I think I can just do this. How about that? It looks like you're on the same slide, right? Optimally. Okay, so what you're seeing in our slide background is a look at that survey. And as soon as Shirley showed this to me, I was pretty impressed with it. This is some of question 65, and we just figured you'd want to take a look at it. The survey form gives you, like any survey form, it gives you a very small space to answer something, 4 or 5 lines. And this was not the only question that she overflowed the boundaries and flipped it over on the back and kept writing. You can see there's number 46 got continued too. You can see how even little questions like this, how well did you do in college? Hardly a fair question for a personal answer. I did my best, and then she flips it over and keeps writing. She's not going to be contained by this. Yeah, this was a fascinating challenge for somebody like me who's interested in representing documents and working with markup. It is also something that does not fit neatly within the formal boundaries of crowdsourced transcription, which wants you to, well, I mean, I was curious how the transcription had handled this. And I think what according to the workflow that your student team had come up with, they were concentrating on Anna Julia Cooper's writing, but I don't know that they had picked up the print questions, or there wasn't an easy way to distinguish between the voice of the questions and the voice of the answers. So this is one of those places where I, who work with markup languages and text encoding, saw a place where I could contribute. And I was grateful that Shirley was open to this and open to letting me work with this with my class. I am also very fortunate. One of the reasons I moved from Pitt to Penn State was I was offered a chance to teach a course in text encoding every fall semester. And literally this is about building digital editions and archives and sharing this with students. And this was just, it was my first semester teaching that course, and it was the fall of the pandemic, and I wanted something fun to work with. And this was just, this is a delight. So we have a document data modeling challenge. And what I've done here is just sum up some of the questions that are interesting to confront. So how does text encoding model, how can we write some code that would model the interaction between the survey prompts and the handwritten responses? How difficult is that? How much does Anna Julia Cooper exceed the formal boundaries allotted for her responses? I went into my class saying we could measure that in words or in lines or something. I don't know that they were crazy about that question as I was, but I came up with like a way of doing it that you could, count the number of lines the survey gives you and encode that, and then count the number of lines she took to answer and encode that. And you could actually come up with like a metric for how much she's struggling with the survey format. But yeah, that's a Elisa sort of excitement. But my students got excited about other aspects of this, including like how to represent like the entire document and how to share it, as you'll see. But the really practical question that we all agreed was significant is what historical information about people, organizations, and events is recorded in this entire document? Because as Shirley was saying, like the only part of the survey I think that was published before this was the question 65. Am I right about that? Or like, I don't know if other parts of it, and there was so much more to the survey. And like she's mentioning people, she's mentioning institutions, and that stuff ought to be collected, and explored, and that's data that could be studied. So we only had one semester. I applied what I was learning from the survey as a challenge to my students, and I made it the basis for their first encounters with the text encoding initiative. The class gets 15 weeks, and they had spent September, it's like September, October, November, a little bit of December, right? That university semester. My students, by the time they encountered this survey, had already been writing their own XML, which extensible markup language, and you'll see some of it. They've been writing some of their own simple code. And I wanted to introduce them to what the text encoding initiative could teach them about handling complex documents. So the TEI guidelines is basically a book. So, you can follow this link, and at some point we'll share this slide deck, but you can study the TEI guidelines, and it's kind of a book that you can give people to study encoding methods for machine readable texts, but it's a book in textual scholarship. It teaches you how to work with manuscripts and primary sources and all kinds of documents. Unfortunately, it does not teach us how to handle survey forms and handwriting on printed documents, but it does give you building blocks and structures. It gives you something to read, and it gives you examples. So I did not make my students read all of the TEI guidelines, but I kind of came up with a set of like 3 or 4 chapters. And I asked them to review those chapters and choose things that they thought would help with representing this document. And I gave this as homework assignments. and the students sent back their responses. They weren't all bad. They thought their responses were worse than they really were, as students are. I asked them to pick whatever portions of this survey document they felt that they could read. And, you know, the students are busy telling me how anguished they are encountering handwriting. But, you know, if you give this to them as homework and you make it worth some points, they could grab 3 or 4 questions and do their best with it. I was less interested in their accuracy of transcription than I was more interested in the choices that they made for marking this up, for surrounding this with code. And so you'll see some of this. So the class of 25, I have about 25 students. They submit a variety of responses. Some of them are a little baffled. A lot of students found their way to the TEI header. And I don't really have time to make this a crash course in the TEI, but for those who are not familiar with this, the TEI header is one of the things that makes the TEI really special. It's where they come up with ways of tagging kinds of metadata. And in a manuscript, one of the things we're interested in is describing the hands or the voices in the document. And this was funny. I went to class talking about why do we talk about hands and voices? But in a survey, you could almost see like there's a different person uttering the questions. And there's definitely Anna Julia Cooper's hand writing the responses. But in my head, it reminded me a little bit of a play or like a dialogue that's just sort of back and forth going on here. The students, I asked them to look for code that would help them to distinguish the typeface voice from the handwriting voice. And they found their way to TEI Elements, Hand Desk, and Type Desk. The students were pretty good with that. My student, Alice Wrong, has been a co-presenter with Shirley and me at this because she took the lead on actually completely encoding the survey document and making a web edition out of it. So you'll see her in a few slides later. She has graduated and she's working at her first job, and I wish she could be here today. But she was some of your best students sort of take the lead and jump forward. Alice came in and coded a large portion of the survey and had a really complicated code structure that I then, asked her permission, shared it with the class, and we thought this was great. But I had a lot of student experiments with this sort of in the wild. Now I came in as the professor, and at this point I want to say that I suppose if you're going to have your students do a shared markup project, at some point somebody needs to step in and take the lead as the editor. And I did that because I do have a lot of experience with markup. I have projects on this. So I came in to say, hey, let's change some of these decisions. Let's decide what we're all going to do together. And I was kind of the decision maker in the interests of time. So, and I prepared something called a schema, which is basically, here are the rules. I, the professor, will give you rules, but these are based on your input and based on things like decisions that we made together as a class. And then, that was it. The students are pretty good. If you want, this is my a view of my assignment in 2020. What happened was the student homework assignment coded parts of the survey, and we made the semester projects that I sent to my students in, say, the middle of October. I said, hey, could I have a student project team volunteer to follow our rules and finish coding the survey and find a way to represent it on the web. I also gave 5 or 6 other project options here, and you can see them here. A lot of them were TypeScript because I have a number of students who were just like, I don't want to work with handwriting anymore. And so I gave them TypeScript plays and stuff like that. And they had to model this in XML. My course is unusual. It's completely about transcription, encoding, curation, processing, remediation. I do this every fall. It is a lot of work, but this is the work I love. The students start with modeling documents using markup languages and hand coding them in that class. And they're supposed to, they're doing the intellectual work of figuring out how to describe a document using markup languages. They also decide on how they're going to follow a shared set of rules. Then, and this is the second half of the course, they learn how to process that code. That's a language called XSLT that we use. And they generate HTML, which is probably the more familiar language of websites. I have them curate their code using Git and GitHub, which gives them control over their code repositories. And they're able to publish out of their own GitHub sites, which is completely free and also under the students' control. So the challenge here is they're working in small groups of maybe 4 to 5 people, I guess. Sometimes like an ideal project team is 3, but they get together in groups to do this. And some students have strengths in the markup and some students have strengths in the transformation. I dive in and help them when things get broken. But yeah, that's the semester project challenge. Now, I was promising myself that I wasn't going to get bogged down talking about the code too much, but if some of you become curious about this, you will see it. What we're doing here, the larger phrase is document data modeling. Shirley, you did this with having the students figure out their workflow with Zooniverse for a large pile of documents. We're concentrating on the unusual ones that require a more complicated model. And this is where markup can come to the rescue. I have a quote, this wonderful question 26, what motives prompted you to go to college? Innate and indomitable wanting to know. So yeah, one of the things that I loved about this is that it was this survey spoke to my students as college students, right? It's a survey of Negro college graduates, but to them, it's like, what was the value of a college education? To Anna Julia Cooper, she's telling you, she's got something to say. And I think a number of my students were really captured by that, especially the students who took the lead on the project. So I am not assuming that anybody is familiar with TEI code. And in other talks, I would spend a lot of time on this, but I am going to concentrate on some of the coding decisions that handle the complexities of, hey, look at what happens here on question number 14. Wife or husband, right? You see how that question like made a presumption and Anna Julia Cooper's not having it. And you know what? We need to model that kind of thing in code. Thank you very much. So, we need to, how are we going to represent that? So here's a look at some code. You're like, oh, what is all this code she's talking about? This is what it looks like. And it is, people will famously say that XML and TEI is really hard. I can tell you, I have undergraduates in a 100 level course doing this because we get 15 weeks. It is nice when you can stretch out and make that the topic of your course. Yes. But the students are familiar with how to write the syntax of this. What you can see about this is it's a kind of blocky structure. These div2s are holding the entire question. This is in TEI, this is called an anonymous block, which is just a really weird name, but it's holding, you can see it's like a container. And in here, you see the question. And the students chose to put all of Anna Julia Cooper's writings in these add elements so that they were very distinct. And that makes it machine processable. If you consistently use these tags and you use them, you follow the rules and you don't change this up in the middle, you can reliably figure out what Anna Julia Cooper is doing. So this is the deletion, hand, AJC, rend, strike through, wife or husband. And so we could do that. Coding it is one thing. It's getting the information of the events on the page. That's informational. The representing it on the web is another challenge entirely. But this is also one of those things, I'm going to kind of breeze through this. These are all coding decisions my students came up with. What are you going to do when there's unreadable portions and the survey is torn and there's elements for that? But in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of breeze through to the fun parts. So what do we do when we flip this around and have upside down writing, or it flips over and she finishes writing a question on another page? My students at first, like most students, like me when I first started out, wanted to represent literally what they saw with their eyes. And I wanted to tell them, as your professor, I need to guide you to another way of understanding this. She's flipping over and moving to another page because she ran out of paper. You're not going to run out of paper. What you want to do is put all the pieces of the question and answer together, because that's informational markup. Like, you want to say, you want to have all the pieces of question 26 all together. So that was the stuff I was able to share with them. And yeah. And I am breezing through this, but for those of you who are interested in the complexities of the code, it's all here. But the overflow from one page to another was real. And we were, trying to put the images together to try to read that. How do we do this? And what we did was we put all of those together in one place, but we indicated somewhere in here that we were switching to another page to finish answering it. I think there's a note in here where it says words continue on to the next page of the survey. And I that was the stuff I could teach them because I know the TEI, but it's kind of cool that you can do that. And it's an idea of saying, like, this thing is not literally representing what you see. You're capturing the information somehow, right? So yeah, and then you can see so much prosopography data in this survey. It's kind of amazing and wonderful. And the students wanted to tag that. So they're capturing this in things like org name and, just stuff that we can explore. So yeah, what I wanted to jump to is the part that my students care deeply about. What is this going to turn into? How are we going to share this? What is it going to be? I did not imagine it would that Anna Julius Cooper's survey would ever look like this when on a website. This was my student's design decision. My student, Alice Wrong, who took the lead on this as a semester project, decided that she wanted this survey to look like a PDF form that you fill out, where you get those little box dots in here, like the little, and so that we would need to come up with a way to distinguish Anna Julia Cooper's hand from the survey questions. And what you're seeing here with question 5, this was a new row that Anna Julia Cooper added to the table. And so we wanted to use some visuals to this. And I have enough time in my course to teach them styling code that they can use for getting the output that they want. So my students, what I want to tell you, for those of you beginning an adventure with digital humanities, is that your students are going to care very deeply about the design decisions, and they will get, and they will sometimes have really good ideas like my students did. They care about this. I care that the digital edition is more than a copy of the original. And all of us, what begins to happen is that you realize your students actually start caring about all this. Like, they care, they want it to be good, and they wanted their markup to actually be displayed somehow. They wanted to make the survey easy to navigate and read. My students, I think, are in my program because they see themselves as designers. And some of them are actually thinking of themselves as graphic designers, even when I'm giving them a text encoding challenge. So this was the great excitement, is the great excitement of working on digital editions with students, if you can find, if you have enough time to do it. So I do teach XSLT in this class, and I do teach workshops. I learned from workshops, and I took courses to do this back in the early, like in 2013. I will say that it takes weeks to learn XSLT. It does not take years. It is not horrible. My students love writing CSS, and in my experience, it's sort of like giving them the giant crayon deck, and they go exploring this. You don't have to teach them every line of this. You teach them how to learn it, and they come up with things like this. And at this point, I get to show you. This is a view of the edition that my students produced in fall of 2020, and this was. Like the design vision of a small project team. What they did is they came up with a table of the questions first that they put at the top as a navigation aid. And they're saying, you'll get information about these people, and you can jump down and get to the specific question. Whenever we couldn't read, we had that highlighted in pink. And and yes, I did counsel them on some of this, but a lot of the design decisions, like if my students had their way at first, the font they would have chosen for this would have looked like a handwriting font. And I had to say, like, but nobody can read that. And then it was okay. You know, this was a lot of fun. As soon as they, you know, this was the dotted lines were totally my students' idea. And what's kind of wonderful about this is, and like you can see her words continue on to the next page of the survey, like our voice in the notes comes out with a particular style too. Giving my students a chance to get their heads around how to style this for themselves was a big deal. Like we couldn't do this with WordPress. Like they had to learn the HTML and the CSS to make their own edition of it. And that is hard work, but I want to say it's very worth it if you go off the deep end like me. This is Alice Wrong, whose design vision our web edition was. And when she co-presented with us at some of the digital humanities conferences last summer, I asked Alice to just tell us, like, what impressed you about Anna Julia Cooper? Or like, what's your sense of it? And she saw her as feisty, snarky, strong-willed, with an immense passion for education. I can hear her voice saying that. Yeah, and she chose some of these quotable passages from the survey that, like, you know, one of the most you know, I owe nothing to my white father, you know, the initial act of procreation when they're asking, tell me about your parents, right? Give me a brief estimate of the value of your college training. I thought this was very telling that my students were fascinated with this question in the age of, you know, tuition rates and everything. She was really curious. My estimate can be mathematically stated in dollars and cents. I was receiving $30 per month. Yeah, I mean, so the students are sort of fascinated about that, those kinds of questions. You know, whether Black intellectuals were welcomed in learned societies is a question that my students sort of took notes on. And yeah, in the end, this is our last slide. What I think I have been learning from this is that this collaboration was completely worth it. I reached out to Shirley in August of 2020, just looking for good material to share with my students. And I didn't know where this was going to go. And it has just been a wonderful adventure. I didn't actually know about the survey at the time when I wrote to you, but as soon as you showed it to me, I was like, I know what we're doing. This is so exciting. It has been all of us who have been lucky enough to encounter Anna Julia Cooper, I think from her time and in ours, have been challenged and in some way, you know, whether they're just simply learning how to read the cursive handwriting. All of us, your students and mine, Shirley, have been engaged in scholarly decision-making. And we've all been working to help make her more navigable and accessible. Dare I say, we are forming communities around the shared challenge that this woman has given us. So this is where my students' project lives. This is her GitHub repo. I forked a copy of it myself, just in case she decided to take it offline. But I think this is really, like, this is the home of it. The code base is there, and it links to the web view that's also being published from the code repository. It is not really finished. I did not spend time trying to correct the transcriptions probably as much as we could. Really, it needs to go, Shirley, to your center and have experts go over it. And the edition should continue to grow and develop. I also think a lot of the information about organizations and places that we've been collecting in the code, we should hand that on as another project, right, to another group of students to investigate, like, what are some of these, you know, who were some of these people that she mentions. And so that's the prosopography data. But so there's more to continue. When I contacted my student who took the lead on the web production of this edition, and let her know we were giving this talk, she was like, oh yeah, you guys are still talking about that. That's amazing. I was like, well, yeah, your students will come and go. But I think whatever we're building here should be able to reach to new generations and continue building new projects. And I think that's probably a good place for me to stop. What do you think? Do you want to tell us, Shirley, about this amazing photo? And you would need to unmute.
Sure.
There you go.
Yeah, so Thank you so much for that. I learned so much every time I am presenting with you, and am re-inspired all over again to continue the work. So yeah, this is a photograph of Anna Julie Cooper that was identified by Vivian May, a Cooper scholar, maybe 5-6 years ago, that was in the Library of Congress collection, and is unusual. Not like the other photographs of her taken by Addison Scurlock, an famous African-American photographer. But yeah, so it's just a wonderful representation. It was taken between 1900 February to December 1903, while she was principal at M Street, and just before she goes into the embattled controversy and struggles with the DC Board of Education. So
Great. Yeah, and actually we could put the link to this in the chat too. So one of the things, I'm not sure, Shirley, do you think it's okay to tweet the slides out, or you're not quite sure? But we could harvest some of the links to point people to stuff if you want.
We can certainly do that after. I think we just need a few minutes. We'll go through them and then tweet.
We'll go through them and make sure
all the links are working, and yeah. So thank you so much. Should we turn it back to Jamila for?
Yes, thank you. I didn't want to interrupt because I was taking copious notes here.
Yay.
Yes, thank you both for that. We are going to open up for questions, and I encourage you, if you have questions, to place them in the chat, or I think we can, have you unmute yourself and ask them directly as well. But I just wanted to point out a couple things that I thought were amazing about this project, and that maybe you all can expand upon through the Q&A, is that there seem to be these real layers of both teaching, but then integrating that teaching, research, and then integrating that research into the teaching and into your pedagogy, and then regenerating, really kind of creating some newborn digital scholarship from what you're doing in the classroom. And then I think carrying it through your presentation and ending with kind of Dr. Beshero-Bondar, your emphasis on what now needs to maybe go back to Dr. Moody-Turner's class, or another class to be done. And so I really appreciated the way that you both kind of explored key questions. And I think oftentimes when people think about integrating digital tools and technology into their curriculum, they think a lot about the technology, but really you were focused on things that were that were first and foremost methodological to the content you were dealing with, the person whose life you were looking at, and the world that they inhabited. So you're asking questions about what are the opportunities to engage this material today? What are the constraints that, engaging it within the digital might bring up? What does the digital allow us to do differently? And both of you kind of focused on engaging the digital as a transformative pedagogy, but also as a transformative kind of learning opportunity as well. So those were just some of the key pearls that I took away. I do have questions, but I want to open it up to our audience. If you have a question, please feel free to use the raised hand feature, or you can go ahead and place that in the chat, and we'll kind of let you join the conversation. While folks are collecting their thoughts, I guess I can just throw out a question. So ending where you did in this talk, do you see there being another layer of exchange happening in the near future, where you might now take what was done through the TEI class and then go back to the center and think, how do we maybe expand upon some of the kind of the larger universe that Julia Cooper was writing about in that survey, and giving us kind of sneak peeks at.
Yeah, so I'm not sure which of us should start with this, but what do you think, Shirley?
Start, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So my sense of this is my students, put tags around things. They would start tag and an end tag. And one of the things they did is like every time they saw an organization, an educational institution or a person, they used a tag for that consistently. So in the TEI, they used org name for an organization and purse name for persons. It's really easy to just reach in and grab all of those and make a list of them and pop them in a spreadsheet and hand them on and say, or just, put them in a really simple document where you could just research this. In my life, what I like about markup is its versatility. It doesn't have to be a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be in Microsoft Word. It's just markup. It's a text format that's sort of regularly expressed. And I can hand that, Shirley, to you in any way you want, right? And then you can run with it. I mean, a spreadsheet sometimes makes sense for what we call prosopography data, because you could just, here's a person and here's where they are. And here you could even start saying like, well, where else in her corpus is this person mentioned, right? And that's, you start building a network of information and in whatever format you choose, right? Like that's and that's one of the things, like sometimes people have friction with us weird markup specialists that like, oh, it's abstruse what you do, and like Roopsie, I think you've called it a cult once or twice, right? Because it's complicated. It looks really complicated. But one of the things, like if you're doing it well, we should be able to share that, like markup people should be able to share that in simpler forms that you can express in text, and that there's like, that you could do with it what you need to do. So if I am lucky enough to continue collaborating with Shirley, I will be helping to share that with you however is useful. So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that is, that would be a wonderful kind of next step in the collaboration is sharing the information on the organizations, families, names, places that we can pull out of the edition. And I think that's very much in line with some of the questions that we're asking in the Black Women's Organizing Archive and in the Center and Douglas Day more broadly. I don't know if folks participated in Douglas Day, our International Transcribathon event this year, but one of the things that was slightly different is typically it's transcribing documents. But this year there was also a kind of searching and indexing component to it. So wanting to say, okay, well, how do we identify women in these documents and these colored convention documents where women are often represented in ways that aren't legible? And so how can we get people, with just enough framing to be able to read these documents and be able to identify women's names and to pull those out and to create, the sheet and start thinking about, okay, so what does this mean? What other, how else do we need to continue to build this so that we can see what it means across lots of different spaces. So I think that's really, that would be a wonderful kind of immediate next step for us. And we're certainly thinking along those lines as well. And I think there's also, so I think in terms of, and Jamil, I want to say thank you too for such a wonderful recap of, of the presentation and such a wonderful question. And, so I think that the in terms of the kind of technical logistical next steps, and I also think that, I would love for next semester to have my class spend some time with the edition too, and to do, I guess I'm really lucky to be with a lot of people who have lots of technical skills and background and knowledge, and to be able to pose questions that we can then think about, well, what kinds of ways do we need to represent this? What kinds of digital tools do we need to represent this? But really letting the questions drive that conversation. So I would love for my students to spend some time with the digital edition and then see, okay, so, what questions are you generating? What does this answer for you? What would you like to see? And then we can keep that two-way conversation going.
Yeah, I guess you could maybe punt that back to my class and say, hey, they don't like some of these decisions you made. And so how would we change this? But then I could also, it could be the basis for a workshop where your students get in the code and change it themselves, right? Like there's always that opportunity. So yeah.
And
I love
think
that.
Your point, Jamila, too, about, in some ways, this is like the iterative process, and it's hopefully, one of its most generative forms is to be able to have teachers, researchers, students, scholarship, all kind of moving forward and editing and revising, together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the gems of this project as a whole, is that even in your own kind of practices, is that it's never finished, and there's always something else that can be done. We have another question from the audience, from Mila Aponte Gonzalez. Would you like me to ask the question, or would you like to unmute and ask? Or I don't know if we can actually unmute. Maybe I shouldn't, I should just read it off. Okay, so this Mila Ponte Gonzalez says, fantastic project. Could you talk a bit about the digital collaboration platforms and tools, in particular Zooniverse and others that were mentioned and used, that you used to research and develop these amazing DH resources?
I think you first on that one.
Okay, sure. So we were really lucky we have an amazing team, again, and so it was actually Jim Casey who introduced Zooniverse into our world in terms of thinking about how to create a transcription project that could be accessible and engage a really, really large audience. So I'm not an expert in the Zooniverse platform, but the Zooniverse platform was created more initially in the sciences, and really thinking about kind of identifying and taxonomies related to more scientific subjects. And so we were really lucky to have a workshop with Zooniverse, in which they were thinking about what do we need to do? How do we need to think about this to facilitate work in the humanities, to facilitate really text-based work? So we were able to have really great conversations with them about the platform, and thinking about ways, what could we do to kind of tailor it to our needs. And the students really took the lead on learning the platform, learning how to create the workflows, learning how to go through all of the steps of creating the manifest, of uploading the digital files, of creating the workflows to be able to actually create the project and make it accessible. So yeah, it was Sam Blankham and Cliff Johnson at Zooniverse who really led us through that, but it's a wonderful platform. And I think for us, what was most exciting was that it allowed us to invite people into the process of creating knowledge, who were associated with Cooper and her work and might otherwise not have been. So there's a wonderful moment where one of the AKA sorority sisters, so it's one of the first kind of Divine Nine Black sororities, and one of the women, the older women from the Divine Nine, was talking about dusting off her French so she could transcribe some of Cooper's letters from Paris, and so it was really about what it made possible and how it made it possible for people to kind of interact across that platform and transcribe. But we could get, Justin Smith was our student leader on that project, and they could talk a lot about all of the decisions that they had to make around designing that project and workflows and all of that.
So on my end of it, I'm gonna I'll share screens for a second here. This is a view of the coding editor that my students and I use, and I did make sure that we purchased a license for the Oxygen XML editor in my program because I like this. I have this in souped up dark mode because my students like that better. But one of the things you can see is that there's syntax and error checking going on here. And this is a bit of project code over a different text. I didn't grab the Anna Julia Cooper one, but this one is saying that this is violating our schema rules. And it's saying, hey, element editor is missing a required attribute. And students learn to write code in a good, like you want them to have a good coding environment. Oxygen does cost a little money. And if you get involved with markup, a lot of people learn using it. I don't run projects without it, but I do know that there are other code editors around. Nick, are you still here? Hopefully I didn't chase him away with that. Nick Laconia was here, I thought. Are you there? But I think he was involved with yes. And it's right. And so some people like Adam, one thing I want to know is like, can you get your schema association to work? And is it giving you good syntax checking? If it's giving me those two things, it's probably okay. Also, can it handle doing transformation code? Oxygen can give you all of that. But you kind of need to be dedicated to like the markup ecosystem for, you want to find a good editor. And I will say, like, I still believe Oxygen is the best, but I'm aware that there are a number under development. So, and some in the audience might speak to that too. So, right. One of the things I like about like choosing the code editor that we're all using is that it can handle the XML, the transformation to HTML, and the web work my students are doing. So there is that. But you could do any and all of this work in a free text editor if you're super, super careful, as my students are not. So yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. And, unfortunately, we have reached the end of this time, and I feel like I'm just getting started. But I wonder if for those who are here, because I know we have some people who are part of our first inaugural group of DEFCon teaching fellows who are in the process of designing courses. And I wonder if I could squeeze in one last question for you both, which might be too big, but hopefully we can fit it in, which is, in the semester and or quarter system, I'm not sure if you both teach in the semester system, but you only have a certain number of weeks. How do you balance, and this came out a little bit, I think, in your presentations, but how do you balance the thinking and doing portions of when it comes to integrating, because there's so much that you talked about that is, you have to deliver content first to understand why we value this history, why we value these writings and these documents, or even why we value these methods in order to respond to these, documents and interact with them. And there's so much that you have to kind of do by way of building content knowledge, building hands-on skills, and then getting students to, I think, where your student Alice Wrong went to with is going beyond and just developing those transferable skills. How do you balance it all in one class?
It's awkward. Oh my gosh. Well, so because sometimes I feel like I don't want to be a computer science professor. I am not that. Like, this is a humanities class. It's a class in humanities coding and like archiving, and there has to be research questions, which is what I loved about encountering Anna Julia Cooper. The only way I know to make sure that I'm not just teaching tech is to make sure this is always grounded in developing a project, and to say, like, this project, like, we have standards for it. There are things that we need to know. This needs to be authoritative. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to be something that people can check, and it needs to be something we can share, and all of those things. And I think what I noticed is, like, I suppose in my mind, the idea that this is that the way we balance this is making sure everybody cares about that. And I think people do, like, they become committed to this. Meeting Anna Julia Cooper meant that, it would be different if I was just teaching a class and here's how to code in TEI XML, and you have to learn all of these things, and I'm going to give you a 100-point test on it. Like I would never do that. And in fact, my students write really messy code sometimes, but they have to clean it up for the project and we look at it together. I sometimes don't feel like, I feel like there's so much, like it's hard work to do this, but it's so rewarding at the end of a semester when the students meet the project deadline, share their proof of concept, and also talk about what they couldn't do inside 15 weeks. So Shirley, how do you balance it all? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And I think it's important to be really honest and transparent about how challenging it really is. And I'm still trying to figure that out. And for me, I tend to focus, you know, the focus has been more on the content and the method. So teaching about, you know, who Cooper, the content, teaching who Cooper is, the theories, the work, the life, the time, all of that. And then the methodological questions, you know, like, well, when we encounter the archive or we encounter the text, how does this inform the method that we need to talk back to the content questions or the theoretical questions or what have you. So there's a real back and forth there, but the challenge is adding in that third part and saying, okay, and now build a Zooniverse transcribe project too, you know, and it is a challenge. And when we participated in Douglas Day, we actually did a whole course on Black women's intellectual history. And then the Zooniverse project was a kind of separate outside of class. They were students from the class, but they were kind of fellows who worked on the project. And so they had all of the knowledge that they had from class, but then it was actually a kind of, you know, it was after the class that they actually built the project. I think the other thing that's really important is finding collaborators, especially for faculty who work in the humanities, thinking about who else can I work with? I don't have to know everything, you know,
No.
I don't have to know how to do all of this. And it takes a lot of time and forethought and planning. So I've had a number of classes where I'm like, we'll just do like a 3-week section and we'll do this. And it's like, no, that's got to be planned. You've got to get the collaborators on board. So, you know, thinking about it way out ahead of time to plan how someone can come in and kind of work with you to do, you know, different parts of the project. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but it's been fun to see. I mean, so many more models emerging as this work continues, Elisa being one of them. So thank you.
Well, thank you both again. I love this talk. It's like it goes to the beginning of your talk where you're saying these were the things that Anna Julia Cooper wanted to see happening, the kinds of transformative learning experience. I think we're all kind of made better for her work and for the work that you're doing with her work. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this conversation. And I believe we have the dates in the chat for our next talk and also for the DEFCon annual meeting in May. So please, if you're here by chance and you're not a member, join, it's free. And also stay tuned for more conversations to come. And thank you to both of our speakers one last time. I'm going to give you a round of applause as well as a virtual one. And I hope everyone enjoyed themselves.